episode of Basic Ass Bitches. It is January 5th, 2020. My name is Sammy, and this is my sister bitch, Kira.
Hello, I'm the sister bitch. And we coined that term while creating this show. And I assert that throughout the life of this show, we will be creating many, many more terms that we will endearingly call each other and in a very judgy way call everybody else. So sister bitch Sammy, how's your new year been going?
Oh, it's been going great. So finally, my holidays have ended. They stretched out for so long.
They did.
Did you experience that also?
Of course I did. I was the cause of that experience.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So when we call each other
such a
sister bitch, we actually are sisters. So from the same mom and dad. We are 7 years apart. Mm-hmm. And we decided we wanted to do a show together, mostly because we really enjoy our conversations about things, and we thought that maybe other people would like to hear and listen in on some of our conversations. They can be very vulnerable, they can be very silly, and I think that they're very relatable. And so, even though a lot of times we may be taking a silly perspective or even a scientific perspective because we both come from fields that involve mind, body, transformative, neurological science, I just think that putting all of those things into a cauldron together will be a very fun show, a lively show. And as a warning, we do curse a lot as a duo, and so I wanted to make sure that we do address that, and if you are a non-cursing company, to pop in some headphones, possibly.
Yes. And, we would like to think that we are so significant that our conversations will be interesting for other people to listen into. But I think with everything we bring to the table, it should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sammy, what has you so interested in sharing your insights and thoughts about basic ass bitching in general, and why, in your own words, why are we taking on that term?
Yes. Well, so I come from a perspective that human is human. I get pretty irked at the conversations that create dichotomy. So like men versus women, or straight people versus queer people. I'm just human. And so, and we all are. So inside of this show and what we're doing, I kind of have it that bitch doesn't have to be a negative term that is attached to women. A basic ass bitch is just your everyday human who loves connecting with other humans, who really loves, the fad of the moment or the kitsch of the week, or, what's going on, and wants to be connected to their community, and wants to know what's the haps.
What's the buzz? Tell me what's happening. We were singing that before coming on.
Definitely.
So I think it's on the brain. So how that's going to look and how we're going to do that is we're going to be taking pieces of our own lives, pieces of current events, pieces of articles that we've read, things maybe that's come up with clients of ours. Obviously, we'll be very discreet about who those clients are, but bringing those into the conversation to highlight our society's dominant narratives, our society's addictions, our society's racism and misogyny, and we'll be using a lot of irony, satire, so we'll be as clear as we can inside of those frames, but I have used irony and satire on the internet before, so I know that sometimes it can feel a little misunderstood as well, so we'll try to be clear about when we are in those spaces. So, yeah. Cool. You wanna go ahead and start on the first segment?
Yeah, I do. And before I do that, I want to give a shout out to our guest who is outside trying to figure out how to get in. So
yeah. Oh yes, we'll be having a guest every single week. They will be one fantastic basic ass bitch doing really, really incredible things. So Carrie Drapac is our guest today, and she'll be joining us in our third segment
Once she figures out how to
once
get
she
in.
gets into the building. I texted her back though.
Oh, okay,
so
cool.
she should be taken care of.
Fantastic. Thank you, sister bitch.
That's what I'm here for.
Okay, so for our first segment today, something interesting that I've been mulling over for a long time, but actually then found an article and some research on, which is cool, is an article I found in Psychology Today from a doctor, Robin. What is this bitch's last name? Koslowitz. Robin Koslowitz. She is a child psychiatrist or psychologist. I want to make sure I get that right.
Integrity.
Oh, integrity. I know. What a bitch. Licensed school psychologist and clinical psychologist. Okay, cool. So Robin has an article in Psychology Today called "There's No Such Thing as a Bully, Only Bullying Behavior." Now, why I find that this is a very important article to look at is, or just a very important perspective to look at, is that so frequently we go around talking about, our abusers or the bulliers, those bad people. And rather than looking at really what makes this person that way, we just kind of point fingers and blame. Mm-hmm. So she talks about how calling children bullies in school can actually create an internalized experience for them that they see themselves as bully, that they see themselves as bad or mean, and that can turn into then spiral into a life of being a bully or a life of trying to compensate for that, and how using those terms, especially with children, but with anyone, can actually make the situation worse. Like she identifies various bullying behaviors. So there are 3 types of bullying she outlines. There's verbal bullying, so like calling someone names. Social bullying, which is creating someone as an outcast in their community. And then physical bullying, which is physically harming someone, hitting them, tripping them in those ways. And so she states that, many people and children can participate in bullying behavior, whether you see it or not. And at the end of the day, they're still just children. They're still just small humans who are learning to navigate their own emotional experience and how to deal with that.
Well, and I thought what was also very interesting about what she said in this article is that the being a victim is also very harmful. So when you call children bully, and the other child victim, not only does it actually implant itself like on a cellular level inside of that child, the victim or the victimized also can start to learn or be conditioned to think that I need to be saved, I need to be rescued, I am victimized, or, people are out to get me. And so I thought that it was interesting to see both sides of that same coin and how everybody in a ripple effect gets impacted by being called those things. I don't really know how else to say other than just like, you are that thing. And it's not only victim and bully that we get called as we're children and even as adults. There's so many other things.
That
we can be called.
I mean, when I was growing up, so I was the bad kid.
Rebel.
I really was. So, I started smoking cigarettes when I was 6. I carved into my mother's door frames. I made her life hell. When she came home from work, I would kick and scream until we got into a physical match. That was my goal. And I mean, looking back on it, pay attention to me.
For the love of God.
Looking back on it now with the education I have and the experience I have. So I'm a mental health professional. And so looking back on it now and at my childhood development, I see that, my mom was a single mother. Both of my siblings were so much older
Our
than me.
mom was a single mother.
Okay, yeah. But my siblings being so much older than me, 7 and 14 years, I was, I was alone a lot growing up, and my mom, our mom, was working 16 hours a day, so no one was ever home. I was a latchkey kid, like literally wore a key around my neck from the time I was 7.
Attached from a piece of yarn. I mean, there wasn't even really any glam around it, which
there
was
really wasn't.
Even a chain would have felt a little bit more
It
like.
was a pretty blue key, though. That key had like some nice silicone blue on the inside of it.
So for finger comfort?
For finger comfort.
Come on. Good thing this blue gel is on here.
Yeah, it was very nice. So I was crying out for attention, and it's something that that Robin, Dr. Robin in this article points to, is that we don't know what's going on in the background of these people's lives. These people who we call bullies or abusers, like there's so much treatment that is required to overcome our victimhood, but there's also so much treatment that is required to overcome our bullying behaviors.
Absolutely. Well, and speaking of that, one of the things I got to thinking about while reading this article is also bullying on like a more macro scale. Right now we are in a conversation nationally about being, led by the quintessential like cyberbully. And how do we as a nation and as a collective actually move through this? A couple of the other articles that you sent were articles all about how to resolve bullying like as an adult.
Yeah.
Right? Because that was one of my questions in the first article, because it was all about children. Then I was like, well, this is all well and good, but we also deal with bullies as adults. Oh,
totally.
Right?
Totally.
And you, I mean, if you don't mind my outing you,
Nope.
You're an internet troll.
I am.
And so, my question for you also is like, who are you in this conversation as a bully as well? Because we take on all of the roles.
Oh, totally.
At some point, that's why you can't just be a bully. You can't just be a failure. Like everybody bullies, everybody gets bullies. It's just what kind of flavor your personality or who you ended up being, right?
Yeah.
How that comes out, because we all have those parts of us. And so, what is that for you? How do we deal with that on a macro level as a collective? And then what is it for you? That's like a 2-part question.
Oh,
I guess.
what a conversation. So, well, I mean, for me, what I've learned through my own development is, I took that bad kid perspective and I totally internalized that. Like there was something wrong with me. I was never going to be okay. I was always going to be a rule breaker. And I was always going to be difficult to deal with. And so my way of compensating for that was to look really good, like to do everything right, get a master's degree and just be the best, always the best. Like,
while still totally terrorizing our mom with the tattoos and the facial piercings, so it's like, well, society's okay with this, but this will piss my mother off so much.
Yeah. And I think that what there is to learn collectively is that each person is an individual. And yes, sometimes I act with bullying behaviors. I tend to be a less emotional, more intellectual person. And when I'm around people who are very sensitive, I do like to tease. And so,
you're such a teaser. I didn't even think about what a bully you are to your husband.
I'm such a bully to my husband.
It's so bad. There's so many times we'll be having a conversation about a fight of theirs, and she'll be telling me how enraged she is and like this, that, and the other, and he should know and all of this stuff. And I'm like, oh, you kind of sound like you're being a bitch.
Yeah, I can definitely.
And I'm like,
be a bitch.
I don't feel like a very supportive sister bitch right now. And you're being a bitch.
That's what a supportive sister bitch is. Let's be real. Telling me when I'm being a bitch is the role of a supportive
so what's
sister
that
bitch.
like for you to like be in the bullying role? Then?
Well, so for me, it's come to a point where, I can identify when I'm acting with bullying behaviors, when I'm acting with compassionate behaviors. And it doesn't have to be that just because I enjoy bullying that I am inherently and have no choice in the matter of whether or not to be a bully. And
Truth.
because I
Yes.
do have choice in the matter. I always have choice in the matter.
Well, you have choice in the matter for certain. And
yes.
then there are a lot of people who are not as self-actualized as you are that don't have choice in the matter.
Right.
And
Well,
it's that
and-
awareness that creates that choice.
And well, when you bring up the conversation of like, how do we deal with this on a societal
Collective, yeah.
level, you know, that's what there is to do to encourage everyone to take a look at themselves and recognize
I
that
get
they
so
have.
frustrated with that answer,
I
you know?
know,
And
but
I know that it's like the right answer. Like, oh, well, we need to work inward and we need, like, I just want to control people.
Yeah, of course. But you can't.
Unfortunately, I do my best. We're sending out like subliminal waves right now to all of our viewers, all -2 of them right now. So anyway, yeah, okay, I can get that.
So, like, I mean, even if you look at the recommended ways to deal with someone who's bullying, right? Is the recommended ways to deal with them are be confident. Essentially,
Be confident.
essentially, if you know yourself, if you love yourself, and if you're confident in who you are, then when someone calls you like a loud, intrusive bitch,
I'm a trifling bitch.
or a trifling bitch, then you know, then it's not gonna sting as hard. You're not gonna internalize it as much if you know who you are and if you have confidence in your being. Then you can recognize that you have choice in whether or not to be a bully or to be a compassionate person. And you can change that in any given moment as long as you are doing the work to love and accept yourself and have compassion for not only you, but everyone around you that, you know, if they're acting like a bullying bitch, then they might be dealing with something.
Yeah. And I think, you know, anybody who walks around the world without a lot of confidence in who they are and what they stand for or whatever probably gets the sense that they're being bullied frequently.
Yeah.
So it probably is something, there's probably a frequency there for them that bullying is all around them, because I kind of feel like that's the kind of person I was for a very long time. I was the type of person who felt like I was being taken advantage of a lot, felt like I was being bullied a lot. Not even in a classic sense. Like I never really felt particularly bullied as a child, but I did go through some spaces as an adult where I really felt like I was being bullied by the system, by the government, you know, by fucking parking tickets.
Patriarchy.
By the patriarchy. That's another piece. And so I feel like really if you're a person who gets that sense of being bullied or being victim, which is largely what the theme of today's show is. It's about bitches being victimized and like feeling like victims. And so what's really interesting about this article is who we're starting the show about being a victim on the other side of the coin of being a victim, right?
Yeah.
Like on the bully side of it.
Yeah.
And really looking at how does being victimized in those situations, and how does being a bully also create victimization in people as children, and then also creates more and more victimization as adults, and then we start to see those.
Well, I mean, when you start calling a bully, then you're attacking them verbally as well. You start calling them mean, and that gets internalized, and then they become the victim of bullying. Like it's just so cyclical, and the lines overlap and cross so much that ultimately, you know, defining a person by, you know, a momentary lapse in judgment is really really detrimental to their future,
And especially those lapses in judgment when they're children.
Yeah.
You know, and children are so much more malleable, like mentally and physically too, like literally. But so when those messages start getting ingrained, yeah, absolutely. They grow up and they say, I'm bad, I'm mean, no one likes me, I'm unlovable, or any other conversation that comes along with being told that people don't like you.
And now they're victims.
And now Ta-da!
Ta-da!
We've created more victimization.
Yes.
You know.
So, and something I really wanted to outline for this episode specifically, because it's such a heavy episode to have for our first one.
We're like, hey, let's know. Actually, it wasn't even us. We're gonna blame.
You're gonna go ahead and point
just
and
so
blame.
that everybody knows our guests are actually the ones that fuel the themes of the show. So we ask our guests what they would like to be talking about. And then we are going to be shifting and shaping what we talk about and putting in our own perspectives inside of that topic based on what our guests are looking for. So yeah, it does feel like a little bit of a heavy topic for our first one. And it's not our fault, okay?
It's not our fault. And I do want to make known to our viewers, if you are someone who is feeling stuck in being a victim, or you're having difficulty moving to the next space of healing, then the topics of today might be a little bit triggering for you. And what we're intending to do on today's show is to not victim blame or bully blame or abuser blame in any way. What we're here to do is,
except for our guest, we will blame our
blaming
guests.
her.
Yes.
But ultimately, we're just here to create space for conversation, for healing, for widened perspectives.
Yeah,
bless you.
And that is. Oh, I just noticed our dumbbell in the corner there as I turned around to. I did not sneeze. That was a cough. To be clear.
Bless you anyway.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm so sorry I interrupted what you were saying. I'm sure it was genius.
I think it was past anyway.
Okay, cool. So should we move on to the next?
Let's move on to the next piece.
Because it actually is very. Your story very much created a segue into what I wanted to talk about, and something that's only been brought to my attention very recently, which is funny because I've been working intimately with stress reflexes for about 2 years now inside of my career. I started really dabbling in them like maybe about 3 years ago, and then really coming to understand them in the last couple of years. And I would say that in the last few months, something really interesting has caught my attention, and that is that there is a fourth stress reflex. So let me explain a little bit of what stress reflexes are, because the moment I use some terminology that's a little more common, people will grasp right away. And that is the fight, flight, freeze responses are what we call the stress reflexes. And they are at the level of your nervous system. So that means basically that you have no control over when they come up for you. And they can feel all sorts of ways, but basically you'll know your stress reflexes when you get in a really stressful or dangerous situation, or seemingly so. Something like, this situation. Yeah. Right? We were totally nervous. We hoping that we do a good job. We don't want public ridicule. We want to be liked really badly. And so, all of that stuff was coming up for us. And there is a fourth stress reflex inside the fight, fight, and freeze model.
Yeah, whatever those three are.
And that is called the fawn reflex. So basically, when you're stressed out, and I don't know if you're wanting me to expand on what fight, flight, freeze reflex is or not, but I will if you think that's necessary.
I think people know what that is.
Yeah.
You're either fighting or you're running away or you freeze the fuck up.
Yeah. Right? And these are all very biological safety survival mechanisms. And there's nothing bad. There's no morality inside of any of this. And each and every single one of us exhibits all of these. It's just that some of us exhibit them, some more strongly than others. And that's what's been interesting about discovering this fawn reflex, because the reason it hasn't been well known is because a lot of researchers early on, when they started studying stress reflex in human beings, weren't using a lot of women as test subjects in their studies. And so this reflex didn't get exhibited as frequently as it would be had they used an actual population that was exemplary of the human population.
You mean there was a period in our history where women's perspectives were not taken into account?
Can you believe it?
I
I know. We are privileged, right? So what they started to discover is that women actually take on a reflex largely, and it's also very available to men, just like what we were talking about with being a victim and being a bully. It's available to everybody, but it became very obvious that this was a reflex at the level of the nervous system when they started seeing it being played out among a huge population of women. And a lot of the reason for the fawn reflex is because largely women used this and still do use this largely to protect themselves. You know, women aren't really known as the gender of the species that are going to get into a fight, and a lot of that, in my estimation, is because we're not the larger, stronger of weaker. The species. You know?
I mean,
so we've had to use social acceptance and also the nurturing of children to keep ourselves.
Yeah, I was really
safe.
interested in the terms of the article that I received about this.
Yeah, there are all kinds of terms.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, the tend and befriend. It makes a lot of sense, you know, because if we think historically to times when threats were more physical, you know, today in our technological age, we don't experience that as much. But there is strength in numbers. Like it said, if you're pregnant or, you know, running away with a baby, you're not going to be as quick or as nimble. And so when you have a community around you of people whom you've, you know, taken care of, tended to, that you've built social connections with, those people are going to essentially reciprocate that and take care of you in your moment of need.
So there's this like social bank that we build up so that, you know, society will continue to accept us, so that our communities will continue to protect us, so that we will continue to be loved, because that is our strongest survival mechanism. And so when I discovered this fawn response inside of my work, I actually became really relieved. Because, well, first I got really pissed off at myself.
Of course you did.
Right? Because that's one of my other responses is fight, anger. Whether it's at myself or other people, anger is one of my so I got really kind of angry at myself because I started seeing all of the ways in my life that I just give over power and I take myself and my own needs out of a situation just so that I can be liked, or just so that I can be popular, or just so that I can be safe, you know, in an emotional sort of a way. And it's really, I don't know. I don't know what the word is for what being in that space was for me. It was anger, but it was also like a level of compassion blended with like annoyance.
It sounds really confusing.
It was, yeah. It was very confusing.
Yeah,
and,
so I bet finding this was kind of like, oh, my life makes sense.
Well, when you try to puzzle together so many things about like who you are, you know, and when you're on a self-actualization, transformational journey, it's like, why am I that way? Like, I already have uncovered this story or that story, and it doesn't feel like that story really is the causal piece of that action or that reaction or that way of being. And then when you learn, like, oh, this is just a stress reflex that I got taught. Because it works.
Yeah.
Right. When you have a bully for an older brother or a bully for a mother and father, you start to really learn that, like, if I just shut up, if I just cook dinner, if I
Shut
just
up and take care of everyone.
make sure everything is taken care of, make sure like my little sister's diaper is changed, make sure that food, no matter how shitty it is, because I was not
You
good
were not a good cook.
when I was a kid.
No.
You know, as long as that was taken care of, you know, I remember doing things like when I was younger, I would let my friends in the house and I wasn't supposed to. And then they would mess something up in the house. And instead of saying like, oh, Christina did that, right? I would be like, oh, I did that.
Yeah.
Like, I'll take the blame for everything. I mean, obviously, that was also to protect myself from getting in trouble for having friends in the house.
Right.
But I would do that even if they knew my friends had been over because I didn't want the punishment on them. And I didn't want... I didn't want our friendship to be taken away, not necessarily even because of me, but because of their feelings inside of the situation. So yeah, the fawn response has played itself out in my life largely.
Does that also, so I'm curious, does that also play out in the sense of, you know, you and I have talked before about like withholding things to protect someone's feelings? Or is that more of like a flight? Would you think? Like, I'm considering, as you say that, I'm thinking of when I was younger and I would have friends over when we weren't allowed to have friends over. I would just...
And Michael did the same thing.
Yeah, I would just clean up a lot afterwards so Mom didn't see the footprints in the carpet. So like vacuuming would be a way to cover those footprints so that she didn't even have to get mad. It's like avoiding her anger, which then... means that I don't have to deal with that stressor, so I'll just clean the house. Or, you know, with my husband, he's very sensitive, and so if I think something is going to hurt his feelings, and ultimately, like, we don't really need to talk about that thing, it's not going to harm us to, like, not talk about it, so I'll just avoid the sadness and not talk about it.
Yeah.
Is that more of like a flight, or do you think that's, you know, can they play into each other? Can those overlap?
I think that those lines can be a little bit blurred, but I think that that's when the conversation for intention starts to seep in. Like if you're avoiding punishment, avoiding being dominated, then I think that's more of a flight response. Whereas when your visceral concern is how it's going to impact the other person. I think that starts to get a little bit more into that fawn response. You know, so for me, you know, being that because we are so far apart in age, we definitely grew up in different kinds of households. And I watched Mom go through a divorce when I was 10 and 11 years old.
Yeah.
And I saw the hardship on the family when we moved from a really decent middle class neighborhood down to the poorest part of that city. Yeah. And the how like diminished Mom was at that period of time. And, you know, she was actually meaner and more hysterical in my perspective of life before the divorce.
Yeah.
Not your perspective, though. Right?
I didn't know her before.
You didn't know her before the divorce, but you guys had some, like, pretty big clashes as well.
Well, I'm definitely a fighter.
Well, yeah.
Fighting and flighting
are your bags.
Are my main two.
Yeah, fighting is a
mechanisms.
common thread, I think, among all the kids in our upbringing.
Yeah.
Because it was actually valued. Don't show sadness or fear because you will be ridiculed.
Yeah, no, anger is far more productive an emotion. It gets shit done.
It does get shit done, right? So then I deal with this fight and this fawn reflex that are two dominant like stress reflexes for me. And so like what I've found in my adulthood on this path of like self-actualization is that so much of my anger just got turned inward toward myself. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Was something that I know. Something that I heard myself saying a lot. And the way that I would combat that is making sure that I was well-liked, that I was popular. I remember the moment I made an active decision that I would always be well-liked and popular. Yeah. And it was in second grade, right? You know, we had just moved to Iowa. And I remembered being the smartest one in our class because we came from military base schooling and moved into public schooling. And it was, even though I was only in the second grade, I noticed that I was way ahead of everybody in
I mean, when you're the
school.
only one raising your hand to answer a question.
And so I didn't really make friends very easily at that point in my life. And thank God that was just like a transitional like place we were living, you know, because I got to move away from there within just a few months and then start over as like my fun loving and hilarious and like cool self. And, you know, instead of this like brainy nerd that was like a total suck up, and then also got off at the wrong school on the first day of school because my mom didn't tell me what bus stop I was getting off at. So there was all kinds of like pieces that I was like, this is never going to happen again.
Isn't it so funny how much of our identity is formed when we're like 7?
It's incredible.
It's
or before
crazy.
7.
Before 7, yeah.
I just can't point to any of that shit because I can't really remember it.
I know, but I mean, we're all just giant children walking around.
Protecting ourselves, rescuing each other. Because, yeah, there's also that, like, rescuing bitch piece, which is totally a part of my fawn reflexes as well.
Yeah.
Like, if a social situation becomes uncomfortable, I need to make it all, like, better. You know, at what cost? Who cares?
Who cares?
You know, as long as everybody's feeling comfortable, like, it'll be okay, you know, and it's very stressful. I'm like, okay, this stress reflex is actually creating more stress in my life than it is like allowing me to escape from it.
So then what do you do with that if it's creating more stress in your life? What do you do to, I don't know, decrease that stress level? And when these responses are so automatic.
You find people to talk to, people like yourself, a therapist.
What?
You could find someone like me, a somatic movement teacher, you know, to really feel it at the level of your body. Because a lot of times we do detach from our stress reflexes and from our awareness around it because we've detached largely from our own bodies. You know, so you can do things like that. I personally take on breath work. And that has been helping me largely. Anything where you can become really self-aware, aware of your own nervous system responses, and then rematrixing, which is basically choosing every single time that comes up, being like, oh, there's that stress response. Now I get to choose. What do I do? What do I stick on the path that is the reaction, or do I choose something different? And I think as far as time is concerned, we should wrap it up here.
I was going to say, that sounds like a really great segue actually into who our guest is.
I think so too.
Do you want to introduce our guest?
Well, I'll introduce her now, but we're going to take a break, have her come in, you know, so that there's not this weird, awkward like silence or whatever as she walks in. On this, I don't know if there's any other reason. Maybe to check her levels or something. But our next guest is actually my business partner, Carrie Drapac. And she works in many, many ways with the body, with stress reflexes, with victimization, with trauma. And she also works on an energetic level. So there's this whole new space that we get to explore once she joins us. But we're going to be doing a brief interview with her as well. So you'll get to learn more about that. So join us in, 90 seconds.
I know you've been slinking back a little bit here.
Yellow.
Hello, we're back.
Hello.
With our guest here, Carrie Drapac,
Who's wearing a fabulous blazer. Good God.
I am
so fantastic.
I had
that
to
blazer.
celebrate the debut of your show with a peacock blazer.
And mimosas without orange
Yes.
juice.
And it matches.
It does. It does. Thank you so much, Carrie, for being our first guest on the show.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you.
I was honored to be asked, but
Yeah.
not surprised.
Like, who could we ask to be on the show about
Carrie.
basic ass bitches? Well, let's get Carrie on here. Totally. So, yeah, Carrie.
So, Carrie, tell us it's all about you now. Tell us a little bit about what you do, who you are, what's your life's work.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot. I mean, I know both of you ladies because Kira and I have been business partners for 12 years now in Comfy Fitness. So started off as a personal trainer, mainly as a way to support myself as an actor, a performer, mover, all of that. And then I've moved out of personal training mainly because through my time within that realm, I just wanted to work with people on a different level, and I saw that people who were coming in for more aesthetic goals, they weren't necessarily interested in some of the things that I was noticing, as to like why they couldn't achieve proper form in certain movements, and happenstance through my own life experiences, I sort of tripped into the giant hole that is the unseen world, where
That is a big hole.
it's a massive hole. It's basically all of the universe except for what we like to think is reality. So it's pretty huge. And so, yeah, when I fell into that hole there, I found energy healing, which I've now studied for about 6 years. I really started doing a deep dive into the nervous system. And once you really get sort of cracked open in that unseen world, all of your own trauma and all of your own lived experience that really is restrictive within your own body and energetic field starts surfacing and coming up kind of whether you like it or not. And so through my own healing and my own search for how to deal with that, it kind of coincided with what I was really interested in, with helping other people achieve in their own bodies. So I started doing a deep dive into the nervous system, found clinical somatics, which is now what Kira teaches.
Hilariously enough. Yeah. Well, I had to find it some way. you know what I mean?
I am a source point therapy practitioner, and I also am a TRE provider, which stands for tension and trauma releasing exercises, which is a neurogenic tremoring practice, which sounds really out there, but it's really not all that
really
strange.
Not that strange at all.
Basically all animals in the wild do it anytime they encounter what would be a traumatic event, where they go into fight, flight, freeze, and we downregulate through those. I don't even know if you want to call it downregulating, but fight or flight, as you guys were talking about before. Interestingly, you were asking about the flight response and the fawn response, and those are they the same? Both of them, at least in my knowledge of them, live in the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. So it requires a certain type of nervous system activation to go into a fawn response. And so a fawn response, also some sort of, not forgiveness, but you were saying how it kind of like made you really angry. I think it's really nice to know when our bodies are taking care of us, even if in the long run it isn't incredibly productive. Because you get to a certain point in what you are aware of in your own life and how it serves and doesn't serve you. And so this response, ultimately, when you're really looking for incredibly healthy relationships, to be incredibly empowered in the way that you go out into the world, it's never really useful to be stuck in nervous system patterns like a fawn or a tend and befriend response. But you do also have to thank the body for oh my gosh, every time I go into that, it's actually lowering your stress levels. And so it is creating an amount of regulation within your body. And so I did want to bring that up, that flight and fawn, I think you could easily be flipping between fight, fawn and flight, all of those three, because you're activating the sympathetic branch of the nervous system.
Absolutely.
This was
And
off topic with
just to-
tremoring, but whatever.
Yeah, well, no, but just to define a little bit, the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic being the fight, fleet, freeze, and now fawn responses, and then the parasympathetic being rest, digest, chill the F out kind of a thing.
But also freeze. There is,
Really?
yeah,
Okay.
there is a big misunderstanding that the parasympathetic is the place where we want to be, right? Like, ooh, if you're healthy, it means you're just living in your parasympathetic nervous system. No, there's healthy sympathetic
Sorry,
activation.
it's not as clear as that, okay?
No, it's not. There's healthy sympathetic activation. That's where, fight, flight, and fawn live in sympathetic activation, but so does motivation. So does, feeling like you want to set goals and you have the energy to wake up every day and achieve those goals. Now, that could be a little bit more like flipped into an unhealthy side of regulation. If you feel like you are just so driven, you can't stop, you won't stop because your system actually perceives it as a threat if you're not always constantly on top of everything, that you can't relax. So just as there is healthy and unhealthy, or helpful and unhelpful, states of the sympathetic branch, there is in the parasympathetic as well. The healthy state is rest and digest. The unhealthy state is freeze.
Yeah.
Right.
So
It's
living
the freeze
solely in
response.
your parasympathetic nervous system might be like getting a lobotomy and then not having any drive or fear or.
I mean, people that are in, and I will say that I think I spent a fair percentage of the last 2 years in a bit of a freeze state. It brings on a lot of confusion. It can be difficult to make decisions. It can be difficult to find motivation. Because if you think of the more like an animal that's in its freeze response, an animal may try to get away, so it already exercised its flight response. It got captured, and then its body, is going to go into freeze because predators don't like dead meat. So if
I can tell you.
So if the body goes into that hypotonic state where blood pressure drops, heart rate drops, everything basically, the body starts shutting down. It mimics that this animal is dead, and so then the predator is likely to become uninterested in it and walk away, and so it saved itself.
Interesting.
There you go.
Yeah.
So this is going to get us back to tremoring, though, because if it's in that state, and you can look up these videos on YouTube, and it's fascinating. A lot of times when an animal has gone into that freeze response, it will then, after the threat has passed, it may lay there for a little bit. And I actually watched this happen in a bird where I was house sitting and it hit the window. And,
Oh, God.
And I don't know if it's the same exact thing because when I looked it up, they call it, that the bird is stunned. But so I'm not sure if like that really distinct, like sharp, it happened in less than half a second impact. I don't know if that is actually what's happening, if it is in a freeze state. But if you look up animals on YouTube in the wild that are going into freeze, they'll lay there and then their bodies will start to tremor. So they'll tremble, basically, they'll start shaking. And then after a little bit of that, they'll just hop up and they'll run away. And so this tremoring mechanism is animals' genetically encoded way of shaking trauma out of the system so that they don't become traumatized, which is why it's believed that animals in the wild do not store trauma the way that humans do and the way that domesticated animals do.
Wow,
Man,
that's very interesting.
It's really good.
And when can people take these classes of yours? That
Thank you, Sammy. I was like, we should totally plug you.
Well, I've been nomadic and itinerant for the last bit of time, so people can find me through Comfy Fitness, and my work is all online at this point. I do sessions over Zoom, but also if we're going to plug things, Kira and I through Comfy Fitness this year, or technically last year, we launched live online group fitness classes through a gift economy model. and TRE, a group shake, is one of the online weekly classes.
Man, a group shake sounds like so much fun.
I know.
It really does.
All right, well, let's dive in because I want to make sure. Oh, we're doing okay.
We're doing all right. Okay, so Carrie, when you were invited onto the show and you chose the topic of today, what had struck you to want to talk about victimization today?
Well, Kira had just randomly, I think during one of our business meeting calls, just been like, "Hey, Carrie, do you want to be me and Sammy's first guest?"
To be fair, Carrie and I are on about 6 hours of business meeting calls every week, so it would have happened during one of those times, regardless.
So, I was like, okay, well, what's the deal with the show? And she tells me, oh, it's called Basic Ass Bitches. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, this isn't a basic topic. This is kind of like, to me, of like slightly evolved ass bitches that have like some amount of self-awareness. But I thought, that's perfect because that's really in terms of what's going on socially. Sometimes I have a really hard time plugging into it and getting emotionally involved in it because of the nervous system education. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times it's like when you look at things through the lens of the nervous system, it's like you can drop down underneath what's happening and what's being put out there on social media and basically all of the nervous system activation that is happening, like through a country, through your community, through all of social media, and you can say, ooh, there's something here underneath all of this that isn't being addressed. Yeah. And if we can get to that, then we're not going to be spinning our wheels for as long. Or evolution, on a collective level is just going to happen faster. Yeah. And I had recently, I think maybe that day, read, it was kind of this coalescence of this Facebook post I had read of someone who I follow on Facebook who does some activist work, and their activist work is really somatically driven. So of course I'm incredibly interested in that. So I had read this post, and it also was going hand in hand with an interpersonal issue that I was having with a member of the opposite sex. And so this Facebook post was all about how this person, and this was on a private Facebook page, so I won't say who it is. But yeah, this person was recognizing and had seen in a lot of the circles that they are in, they had seen and also been maybe victim to, what we could call sort of weaponized emotions by women. Women who had survived something, and as women, if we think about, the larger systems of oppression, right? We've all survived patriarchy, or we're doing our best to survive it gracefully. Men are too, which again is part of, what this conversation is.
Yeah, that's a conversation we don't have frequently.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
needs to happen, because again, what's happening in women's nervous systems is something's happening in men's nervous systems as well from these systems of oppression. Because we're all part of them.
Yeah, we're all subject to it.
And so this post was talking about,
and therefore, would that make us all like survivors? I guess in a sense, because as I was reading this and the commentary on it, which was extensive, I started really feeling and hearing like, oh fuck, we're all survivors.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was someone who commented exactly on that, and also how triggering that can be for people who are considered the privileged within a system of oppression to realize that they are also survivors of it, that all of a sudden that can just like flip something for them and trigger the shit out of them, because it's like, whoa. Then once all of a sudden, if you realize that you may have trauma from a system of oppression, like then you have to face your own trauma. Yeah. And that shit is scary sometimes. And a lot of times our systems, our bodies are protecting us from that, because it really does it does feel as if like death is imminent sometimes when all
really
of that
does,
trauma is coming
though.
up
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
be sorted through. So yeah, this post was all about how this person had been experiencing within their circles and within social justice circles that people who are survivors of oppression, they had been regularly seeing those folks sort of taking their emotional triggers and their emotional reaction and feeling like playing that out and sort of putting it on the perceived oppressor was a form of that was like something to be sought. Like that's healing.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's a step of healing, I think, for someone to be able to exercise their anger or be able to speak up for themselves.
It's a piece of it for an individual, right? It's not, it's not the piece for every individual. Some individuals do need to get to that point, and it's, yeah.
And it becomes highly problematic, which is what this post was about, or part of what it was about, when it's these larger systems of oppression and the emotional triggering it has on an individual, and then that gets played out within an interpersonal relationship, right? So it's like, I can't take all of patriarchy and then like funnel my anger about it and all of my emotional reaction about it into a man that I'm in an interpersonal relationship with, whether that's one of my brothers, my father, a boyfriend, a male friend, that like that really, not much of anything constructive is happening when that is playing out.
It's just further
Absolutely.
causing that person interpersonal trauma, and just reinforcing the cycle of societal trauma that we have in this dichotomy of like it's men versus women, and there is no in between.
I think that it gets played out on obviously on a large scale. We see it all the time. We see it everywhere, but also on a very, very small scale. I discovered about myself many years ago that I'm kind of a man-hater, and that I remember the first time I realized it, and I think Carrie was the first person I told. I was like, Carrie, I think I might be sexist. And Carrie's like, oh, really? I was like, I think I kind of think men are idiots. But what I was saying inside of that admission to her is that, not that men are idiots and it's okay to be sexist in that way. What I was expressing to her is like, what I'm realizing is that a lot of my relationships with men in my life are being flavored by this man-hating that I have inside of me due to, fill in the blank, right? Yeah. Fill in all of the blanks. That's why I hate all of the men, right? But it was right there. And it's like, holy shit. And I'm looking at like how I treat my male clients when they walk into a session early versus how I treat my female clients when they walk into a session early, right? Male clients walk in 10 minutes early and I'm like, what the fuck? Why are you trying to bogart my time? Right? Like I'm not on the clock right now for you.
Right.
Whereas a woman client walks into my studio and I'm like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, what'd you do? And it's like just even starting to correct that for me was a huge transformation.
Yeah, I saw one of the comments on that thread because you had tagged us in the thread so that we could look over it. Thank you. And I thought one of the comments had just very beautifully summed it up. And so I wanted to read that. It says the way I think about this. The way I think about this is that while the power of the patriarch has been used against me on a systemic, cultural, and individual level, I still have power in my individual relationships with many men. I carry a healthy level of responsibility in those relationships. When I abuse that relational power, I am inflicting relational violence on men. That is not dismantling anything. That is just changing who is in the role of the abuser.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had to face that in myself. I mean, I'm not someone who, within my own nervous system, goes toward fight. And usually any anger that I have gets turned on myself rather than anybody else. And we usually think of aggression, or we think of, violence and oppression happening through, happening through fighting, happening through aggression. But I can even trace, and I was telling Kira this on a drive recently, I was like, oh my gosh, my college boyfriend, my very first boyfriend, and I had no experience inside relationships whatsoever and grew up in a family where you did not talk about anything. So I really had no business being in a relationship of any sort. But, that's the only way you learn. I know that's the only way you learn.
Come on.
And I look back on it now and I'm like, oh my God, I feel so bad for him because he grew up with a mother who was a psychologist. And so he had some awareness already. And anytime we were having a disagreement, I would not go into fight. But I was so beholden to my own victimization as a woman within patriarchy that I would just find any way to not take responsibility for my own actions, my own reactions, my own part in the relationship. I always had to be the victim because it's the only place I felt safe.
Mm-hmm. It's a very powerful place to be in too, and it's an easy space to get to when you have that I've been oppressed systematically on your side, right? Because it's right there. And especially with boyfriends like Justin, right? I never met Justin, and I know him through your telling of him. I imagine that he was very aware of the systems that might cause any sort of backlash or anger. I imagine that about him.
It was 2001,
That's
2002.
true.
And
I forget about the time. I imagine that he's probably that way then now.
Yes.
Well, so then on this topic of responsibility, how does one move from the space of being a victim? Because you've obviously, worked a lot in moving from that space into a more, I don't know, enlightened or healing space.
Taking goddamn responsibility.
Space of taking responsibility.
Taking responsibility sucks sometimes. Speaking
really
of taking
does.
responsibility,
Yes,
to
I
be
wanna be
responsible
responsible
for
for
time,
time.
it is. It is 12:02, so let's take one final thought from Carrie and then wrap this shit up.
Yeah, and I mean that's a complex conversation as well, because again, then privilege gets wrapped up into it, and what does privilege do for your ability to take responsibility for your own trauma? But the kind of phrase that keeps coming up as I heard you guys talking in the segments before this, and of course through this, is Stephen Porges's, who was the scientist who came out with polyvagal theory, which looks at social engagement in the nervous system and the evolution of that. So he has what he calls the window of tolerance. And so for me, taking responsibility, we don't have the ability to take responsibility, I don't think, for ourselves and for our own emotional reactions until we can get some distance from them. And so, there are many ways of getting about that. There's meditation that allows you to step outside of that and kind of see things from an observer perspective. There's different somatic practices. There's nervous system regulation. All of these different real self-care practices. Getting a manicure is not going to help with this. That's not real self-care.
It is very fun and very cheap, and I highly recommend doing so.
But the window of tolerance is basically how much can your system be with before it gets triggered into sympathetic or parasympathetic arousal. So what situation can come up before you go into fight, flight, fawn, or into a freeze response. Mm-hmm. And really, I think somatic practices are one of the best ways of increasing that window of tolerance so that there's more space within your system before the nervous system starts responding in such a charged way.
Yeah.
And we can all feel, it's once we tap into ourselves and we start tracking sensation, we start tracking, all of the different ways that our system takes in and sort of starts channeling information it can channel it into meaning, it can channel it into images, into bodily sensation. Once we are with that and can start tuning into that, and using that as a way to say, oh, something's going on here, then you can start looking into the ways that information is getting channeled, and it gives you space and it gives you time, and you can start tracking patterns in what your body is doing with that information and start hopefully changing those patterns. And then a lot of the somatic practices really help with and energetic healing practices as well, because energy healing, directly relates to the nervous system, and it starts almost like I liken a lot of it to an Etch-a-Sketch. Or if you have an Etch-a-Sketch, over time, it's there. And if you leave an Etch-a-Sketch with a picture in it for years sitting there, it doesn't go away.
Just like a whiteboard, man.
Yeah,
Kills me.
but it's like, but these somatic practices are all about being able to shake out that pattern, so you have a clean slate, so you can be with anything, and you're not just reacting in the same patterns over and over again.
Yeah. There's very deep grooves.
So increasing the window of tolerance and just increasing nervous system capacity and self-resourcing.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
And I would also highly recommend to anyone viewing that that you take on some support and assistance in doing this work. So, inside of that conversation of privilege, it can be difficult to do so if you don't have the money to do that. So, thankfully, everyone on this panel today has created businesses around.
Yeah, and and gratefully, I was looking at this morning, how grateful I am personally to have had the mother that we had that created a life that we are able to actually explore these things for ourselves, because there is a level of privilege that comes with it, which is also pointed out in this thread was incredible. I wish that we could share it as a link online, but it is, overall, it's just a great conversation to get into and to really ponder yourself, where you're using your own oppressiveness as and weaponizing it.
And you can find some of that healing at a very affordable rate through Comfy Fitness.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have our gift economy offerings.
Where we offer 2 different modalities of really getting deep, getting into the nervous system and releasing, letting go of patterns and trauma that you may not be noticing right now.
Totally. And also, my company does offer pro bono and sliding scale therapy here in Chicago, which is called Art of Balance, and you can find us at artofbalancechi.com.
All right, cool.
Awesome.
Let's go ahead and wrap it up.
Thank you so much for being with us today,
Thanks
Carrie.
for having me.
Yeah, so fun being with you. I love you so much.
Love you too.
I love you too.
All right, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you again next week, Sunday at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time.
That's right.